All right, welcome everybody. My name is Bree. If you're new, I'm a registered social worker and the owner of Simply Social Work. And I'm doing a video with one of my favorite social workers and human beings, Michelle. Welcome, Michelle.
Oh, hi, Bree. I'm Michelle. I am a registered social worker. I'm a partner at Statera. I work a lot with neurodiverse humans, and I just want to say I'm a super fan of you. I'm super excited to talk, and I really admire the work that you've been doing with the neurodiverse community and bringing a lot of research to the table. Can I just say the research component has been huge. Congratulations on all of that.
Thank you. Thank you. For those who don't know, and also I'm obsessed with you. Stop. We're not, I am more of a fan of you. We can fangirl all day.
We just talk.
But for those who don't know, yeah, there's new research that's going to be coming out. There's a paper that we're about to put up for publication. And there's another study that's hopefully going to be in paper rating soon. And they're all on, I'll link them down below, but they're the Neurodiversity Matter Project, the Reimagining Care Work Project, and Learning Access, which is all around disabilities and neurodiversity. So you're so good at little plugs. Thanks. You're plugging my own research.
Yeah, but that is hugely important. And that is exactly what we need in the community because as a practitioner that is neurotypical, I rely on conversations like this, research that's done by individuals with lived experience. Like it's so helpful. So just thank you again.
Yeah. So today we are going to be talking about healthy relationships and neurodiversity. There will be a part two because likely we will not cover everything today. So, knowing we have a lot to talk about, let's jump into it.
Sounds great. So I guess let's just start by talking a bit about what neurodiversity even looks like. And I want you to kind of talk about the language a little bit there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no one is going to universally agree, and everything that I say and you say is totally recognizing that. I tend to be really
Hmm.
intentional about language. So if you're a service provider and you're watching, you've probably been taught person first, which is that like person with autism, person with ADHD, person with disabilities. And it was always kind of taught that that was like the respectful way to do it. More and more communities, people with lived experience are actually disliking person first and I tend to sit in this camp because it's sort of an integral part of who we are. Like my chronic health conditions, my ADHD, they
Yeah.
all make up who I am. I don't know what that looks like without. So that's where identity first comes in. So autism's a great example. The autistic community has capitalized the A in a lot of cases, and they call themselves autistic. Disabled, same thing, rather than person with a disability. So I tend to flip-flop, recognizing that no one's perfectly happy with each answer. So that's the disclaimer, but everyone has identify however you like when it comes to your language.
And I guess I'd like to kind of go off of how you prefer to identify. I mean, since we're openly talking about it, I mean, what we're kind of focusing on is relationships and more specifically kind of that differences in relationships with somebody being neurodiverse and somebody being neurotypical as it is. So like how do you kind of identify that relationship? Do you say I'm a neurodiverse person and he's a neurotypical person? Like how do you guys kind of talk about it?
It's really funny too, because I also want to point out for language, some folks hearing this might think that there is a camp that kind of questions if anyone's neurotypical. And we don't have an answer. So this is just
Mhm.
my opinion. And we kind of actually use the term, it's why I used it in the promo. We almost use the term neurospicy sometimes
Yeah.
because, for those who don't know me, I'm married. Um, and my husband, Alex, is does not identify with ADHD at all. He has his own traits of things, and that's his own thing to talk about. But traditionally, for most of our relationship, he identifies as neurotypical, and I identify as someone with ADHD or an ADHDer. We don't have a convenient like autistic is catchy. We don't have like ADHD is a weirdly named issue. So we tend
Yeah.
to call our relationship. Sometimes we'll joke about it and call it neurospicy, but yeah, typically I would identify sort of, yeah, I'm someone with ADHD and he's someone that definitely does not have ADHD. And so it creates some, there are some times where it's not noticeable at all, and there are other times where that is how we literally have to explain it to ourselves of like,
Yeah,
nah, that's an ADHD thing.
absolutely. And I guess so I'm with Alex. I am, so neurotypical and that's fine, right? Like we don't all get to be spicy. But my husband, and who I already requested to be able to talk about during all this, he does identify as ADHD. So he has autism ADHD. And for us, it is easier for me to explain to individuals, and kind of what we've come up with as a couple have been, I'm neurotypical, he's neurodiverse, but he also uses the term neuroatypical quite
Hmm. Yep.
often. So it's just something that we've kind of gotten used to, but it's the easiest way for us to kind of talk about it with each other and with other people.
Yeah, it's sort of that I always encourage holding labels loosely. Actually, acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, they often talk about holding labels lightly in general, but because
Yeah.
sometimes you need almost that catchphrase for either for yourselves or for someone else to understand without it being too rigid. And some folks don't like the labels, so if it's helpful to you, then it's just a quick, easy way to do it.
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest things that we'll probably end up talking about today is communication and
Hmm.
how that has looked within our relationship and within our partnership. Because as somebody that is neurotypical, the world's designed for me, right? The world is designed for neurotypical humans, and the education system, everything that we do is designed for neurotypical. Even the tests, even the psychometric tests that we use to diagnose or to determine if somebody meets criteria for any ADHD or any kind of neurodiversity, it's all done from a neurotypical frame. So what's your thoughts kind of on what that looks like?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because the relationships we're talking about are in the reverse. So
Yeah.
I am a woman, Jackson is a man, and so they're
Yeah.
all those neurotypical kind of frameworks are all also very pathologizing, and they're all representative of what you would expect boys to present with. Once upon a
Yes.
time, girls couldn't have ADHD. It was literally a little boy's diagnosis. So, like, I didn't even identify with ADHD or neurodiversity until, well, I knew you at the time. Like it was a
Yeah.
couple years ago because I was gifted, I did well in school. So all of those markers for what that looks like don't match, right? I was functioning and meeting the markers that neurotypical folks want you to be, right? I
Hmm.
was always that one in class that was like a pleasure to have in class, which, side note, masking. We totally know that's masking now and people pleasing.
100%. Yeah.
100%. But it is interesting because it is one of those interesting challenges when you're different flavors of
Yeah.
neurodivergent or cognition or whatever you want to call it.
I like that. Different
Because,
flavors.
yeah, yeah, because I live and expect certain things when I navigate the world that my husband, who does not have what I have, has never thought of, and it's very assumed. Like the world is assumed him, it's not assumed
Yeah.
me, which can come up with a
What
lot of things.
What do you mean by that? Like, when you and your husband are kind of hanging out, what's kind of an example that you have of what that looks like?
Mm. I was thinking of some ways that things come up. Um, and I think it's interesting too, like I almost have like inside the relationship and outside the relationship examples. But I think like what we're talking about with like expectations, like, and again, I kind of look at it through a little bit of a gendered lens because I'm a neurodivergent woman. I
Yeah.
tend to present very loud, very extroverted, as anyone who knows me knows. And in certain circles, like say I'm in spaces and I know or reasonably guess that it's very neurotypical centered. So things like university
Hmm.
or workplaces. If I am too assertive, too loud, too extroverted, that's perceived a certain type of way. Or similarly, my challenges can be presented a certain way. Like if I'm late, for example, it's like the end of the universe in workplaces if you're late. Because the assumption is in neurotypical spaces, if something's important to you, if you're committed, you'll be on time.
Which feels really unfair.
And it is really unfair because, like, I panic and I hate being late and I beat myself up probably way more than other folks do. It has nothing to
Yeah.
do with how dedicated or committed I am. It's due to the fact that up in here, time blindness is real and executive functioning sucks. So if I'm late, I'm viewed a type of way. That behavior
Mhm.
is often viewed one way, whereas my neurotypical counterparts, oh, you were late, mistakes happen because maybe it's less consistent. Same behavior, but I'm being kind of put up to the same expectations that he is. And
I
really, they're
see.
two completely different situations.
Yeah, and you're being set up to fail because you are supposed to be meeting expectations for a neurotypical brain when that's not how you move through the world.
Yeah, and like certain processes, even like it can create, I guess what I'm thinking when you talk about other examples, how it comes up, like in our relationship, certain processes like intuitively make sense to Alex
Mhm.
in a way that I don't, like he'll have to like sit down and go through it with me like 100 times because it just doesn't make sense. And you could assume something about that, like, am I not being involved enough? Am I just not paying attention? Do I just not care? But it really is like this paperwork was designed assuming that like a neurotypical person is going to read it, understand all the nuance, doesn't have a problem with
Yeah.
deadlines. I don't have that.
That's the it's funny because I guess that's kind of part of this whole thing and what we're talking about, but it's the same for Jackson and I, and he looks at certain things and he's like, it just doesn't make sense. There's such a more effective way of doing this. And I'm like, but this is how it's done. So this is just, there's sometimes from the neurotypical perspective, we just accept things because that's how it's done. And we don't look any deeper than that. Right. And whereas for his brain, he's like, okay, but why do we do it that way? And is there another way to do it? And when there isn't really an answer that makes sense to him, then it becomes a lot harder for him to just engage with it or accept it for what it is. Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pushback. Do you find that?
100%. And like, it's almost this block. So like for
Hmm.
myself, if sometimes my issues with executive function where it's like if there's not a deadline, it'll happen. And there's almost like a block where like you feel it, you know you need to do it. You feel guilty about it not getting done, you're stressing about it not getting done. But it's like this physical, you can't do it. And if someone doesn't have that experience, trying to explain it is like almost impossible. It's why therapy can be so harming when folks aren't trained in neurodiversity, because like
Hmm.
a lot of the strategies about like just doing it and challenging your thoughts. It's not about thoughts and it's not about willpower. It's like a very concrete, like, I know that this is either problematic or unhelpful or wrong, but I'm stuck.
Yeah. And that's something I really have had to kind of work with him on and remind him like, this isn't about you and your determination or your willpower or your intelligence or any of those things. Like, you are experiencing executive functioning paralysis. You're not volunteering, you're not having fun. This is something that you have to go through, right? And to, I guess what I'm hopeful for is that there will be more understanding for that in the neurotypical community and less judgment towards it. So more understanding, less judgment, because with all due respect, like, you guys judge yourselves so harshly, and it just must take up so many spoons
Oh,
on
it's
a
it's
day-to-day basis.
exhausting. It's
Yeah.
exhausting because especially if I don't remember if this was the case for Jackson, but if you're diagnosed later in life, or you
Yeah.
come to also, as a side note, when we talked about language, you don't have to have a formal diagnosis for this conversation. I don't. I
Mhm.
am self-diagnosed, proud and happy to stay that way. But if you find this out later in life, you've chances are had a lifetime of people invalidating you. like
100%.
horrifically. School systems, parents. And I think one of the challenges that really comes up is it kind of sometimes can be perceived in those judgmental ways, right? If someone is just like not, say, like not contributing around the house,
Yeah.
it can be perceived as laziness.
Mhm.
Or if someone's not doing their homework, it can be seen as uncommitted or that they don't care. If someone has a meltdown, right, they can be seen as dramatic, hysterical, overly emotional, manipulative, when that's
Mhm.
emotion regulation problems. So a lot of us neurodivergent folks invalidate and judge ourselves because we've had like a lifetime or many, many years of other people doing it for us all the time.
For sure. And I think that what we have to be able to accept, especially, high functioning autism and what the spectrum actually looks like, it is vastly different from how we've traditionally perceived autism, first of all. But second of all, I work with a lot of my clients, a lot of my autistic clients don't recognize that emotional dysregulation and autistic meltdowns, and it's similar with ADHD. Correct me if I'm wrong. As a human living with ADHD, you would know better than I. But those meltdowns are still extreme. It's just less socially acceptable to throw yourself on the floor and have a full blown temper tantrum, right? Than when you're a child. But those emotions and that kind of energy, that power is still very much inside, right? Like, and as adults, like, for Jackson and I, we're always kind of looking at ways to release that and that emotion in a way that kind of makes sense because he'll go from 0 to 100 and it just kind of happens, right? And it can be very challenging to bring ourselves back, but the more we accept what's happening, the quicker we can bring ourselves back down to kind of an emotional stasis. What are your
Well,
thoughts?
exactly. Exactly. And that's also why, because again, some of those assumptions, again, it is all set up for a neurotypical person,
Yeah.
which means there is an expectation of how much emotion's okay to show and how you can show those emotions and things you can do, things you can't do. And it also has very dangerous consequences outside of the home. That's why, there's a disproportionate amount of neurodivergent folks in the justice system,
Yeah.
especially for youth,
Yeah.
because how body language is read, how speech, tone, everything is read through a neurotypical lens. If you don't make eye contact, you're being dishonest, right? If
Right.
you're not
Absolutely. I
complying,
never
that
thought of
means you're
that.
resistance. Yeah. If you're not
Yeah.
complying, you're resistant, right? Whereas,
Yeah.
does the person even understand what you're
Yeah.
saying? Are you going too fast? Are they because there's autistic meltdown, but there's also shutdown.
Yeah.
When people can get too overstimulated, they can completely shut down. They're not resisting you, they're closed, right? So,
Yes. And the other part of it that you often see more in children, but it still is a defining feature of autism is that pathological demand avoidance. And so, I'll say to Jackson, I won't recognize that he's doing the dishes or something. And I'll say to him, like, oh, are you going to do the dishes? Well, he was already doing the dishes. Now he doesn't want to do the dishes because I said to him, hey, are you gonna, but he was already doing the thing. And so then that immediately elevates him. Whereas I would probably be like, yeah, I'm doing them as we speak. And it would be very easy for him. There's such a process that he goes through that is so much different than what I would be thinking.
oh yeah.
And yeah, so tell me a little bit about that in your relationship, what that kind of
Oh
looks
my
like.
gosh. That is the funniest example that you gave because we constantly have to be so careful of wording. Because, same, if it sounds like you told me I can't do something, I have to do that thing. It could be the
Right.
most mind-numbing, I hate this thing. But as soon as you're like, no, you can't do that, I'm like, wow, now I have to.
Let me show
And
you. Yeah.
let me show you. And vice versa. If you tell me I have to do something, I could be bouncing off the walls excited about it. My shoes are on. You say we have to do it, it's done. It's done. Call it a day.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we tend to try and use a lot of humor about it. So sometimes if Alex words something, he tries to word it very carefully, but say it's a little bit too into the territory of have to or can't,
Mhm.
and I'll kind of my back will come up or I'll start and like he'll kind of call it out in like a joking way. He'll be like, "Oh, this is because you said you can't." And I'm like,
Mhm.
maybe. But even for myself, I have to like mentally be careful of how I talk to myself about things. Like every night, I learned this from my research boss, who's also neurodivergent. She like often every night will do this thing that I now do where I'm like, I don't have to do those dishes. I'm not going to do them. And I'll like
Yeah.
put it out into the void. And Alex is always like, okay, I don't care. But once I've articulated that like nobody's making me, I don't have to, I'm usually like I can. But if I feel like
That's,
I have to,
yeah.
game over. So where lots of folks have those strategies of like, maybe one night a week, let's clean the house. I'm like, oh no, that's a routine and that's a structure and that's an ick. I don't want to. Like, I would rather
Yeah.
sit in this overstimulating environment that I hate because now I feel like I have to.
Yeah. I guess that is something that is well shared amongst the your community. But I think what's been very helpful for Jackson and I is using plain language for things. Like when we wake up in the morning, it's very much like, what's the expectations for today? And using the term like what are you expecting of me? And
I
just
like that.
not kind of going around it, right? And just being like, hey, like this is what we're doing kind of deal. Because prior to that, I did not realize how much of his mind was consumed around anxiousness to try to identify what all the expectations are. And, you had kind of described it earlier in this conversation around being a roadblock, but there's constant roadblocks in an ADHD mind. So, we'll be trying to plan out our day. And if he doesn't understand what that day is going to look like, then it just becomes lawless, right? Like it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, whatever. Like I guess we're just doing whatever. And it just can become so anxiety provoking. So do you find that within your relationship?
It's the constant managing, and I would say it's in life in general, and it translates to
Mhm.
relationships for sure. There's so much, again, because everything is designed in a neurotypical way. And this is, I'm hoping I articulate it okay. It's going to be a little bit broader to the question, but relevant. I see it a lot in couples that I work with, and it definitely comes up in my relationship. And I think in general, we always assume people think like we do and see the world like we do. And so, because oftentimes neurodivergent, neurotypical worldviews are like two parallel roads,
Yeah,
and it's all implicit and it's all implied, there's so much energy of trying to like translate all the time. Like, am I missing something? Am I missing this cue? Am I too loud? Am I
right.
not loud enough? Am I meeting expectations? Is there an expectation I don't know about? And it absolutely can be exhausting. We tend to have to try and be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very explicit as well.
Yeah.
For sure. We've had to do a lot of work around specific language, like around asking very specific questions or explicitly stating needs, because I'll think that I've explained it really well. And then later it's like, didn't get that at all.
And that's exactly the same for us. And I think what's important to recognize, though, and I was reading about this, is that it isn't actually a language problem. It's a language barrier, right, between a neurodiverse person and a neurotypical person. So what they found was if you get a couple of, let's even make it even more simple. If we got you and Jackson together and you guys were talking, it would be a lot easier
Hmm.
because there would be an inherent understanding. And there's so much noise that goes on in the neuroatypical or the neurodivergent brain that a person like myself does not recognize, right? So he started asking questions more plainly. He would be like, do you not think about that? Like, why do you think about that?
It's
Like,
the
where,
classic, like,
where,
what are you thinking about? We'll be driving, and I'll be like, what are you thinking about, babe? And he'd be like, nothing, I'm driving. What are you thinking
yeah,
about? And I will have a monologue little rabbit hole, and he just looks at me like, are you serious? And I'm like,
yeah.
hmm.
And, I will be sitting there and Jackson will randomly think of something that was like 4 days ago. And I'm like, I don't remember that. Or he'll apologize to me because he thinks of the way, like he's thinking that, like you said, that I think the way he does. And so he'll apologize to me for something that he felt maybe he hurt my feelings, or maybe I'm still thinking about it. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
And that just confuses him even. He's like, how do you not know what I'm talking
Remember.
about here? How do you
It
not
comes
remember?
up, it comes up moving on from conflict too. I think. I
Mm,
know a lot of neurodivergent folks articulate it because we've been shamed or judged so much for like missing cues or like, maybe lashing out when we don't mean to or whatever the case. I know I, for one, also there's a lot of overlap between like trauma and
yeah.
neurodiversity. A lot of neurodivergent folks have been through trauma. So there is that like, yeah, like what would take, we have a conversation, he's good, he moves on. I'm up here for
And still going.
and still going for ages. And that's where sometimes if it like the professional side of me, that's sometimes the work that we have to do as well is when is it a couple thing, right? When do we need to communicate about something? When do we need to move forward? And when do I
Yeah.
need to regulate?
Yeah.
Because we have decided to move on. He's moved on, right? He can't manage how you feel anymore because it's gone.
And I can feel that with Alex, because that's exactly what it is like. But I think the thing that a neurotypical person has to remember is that we are able to adjust far easier than a person that is ADHD and a person that is autistic. We have the ability to kind of make those adjustments. And it's not to say that a neurodivergent brain can't make those adjustments, but that it takes a little bit longer or it needs look different than
It's a
within a
process.
neurotypical. It's a process. And
Yeah.
so where in my relationship, and this is what works for us, where I can adjust, I do, because to be honest, it doesn't matter to me. It's fine. There's just not they're not the hill I want to die on, right? And for Jackson, in his brain, every hill is a hill to die on. And
Yeah.
so because he's not able to kind of compartmentalize the same way on the fly, right? And so some of that is being a therapist and from being a professional and learning how to do those things. And some of it's just personality based and some of it's being neurotypical. But ultimately for him, it is easier that I just kind of make those adjustments because I can.
And that's it.
And
Like that, I think sometimes it really comes up that idea of fairness and reciprocity and
um,
equality. And yes, we need to be thinking about all that, but equality and equity are almost two different things, and it's not
yes,
always 50-50. Like the old saying that relationships are 50-50 is not, personally, I don't like
no,
it because it's not. Sometimes I have 80 and my
yeah,
partner doesn't, and that's fine. Or the reverse. Or certain things, like one of my weird executive function things, I get so overstimulated by it, is if technology doesn't work the way it's supposed to. I lose it. I am such a patient person. I am really good in a crisis, but oh my God, if that software doesn't work, I lose it. We're not 50-50 in that situation. Usually it's me rising and then just handing him a computer going, fix it, and then leaving.
yeah,
Now, equally he could, and like definitely would be a thing in school and stuff, like get frustrated about that, or, even like what I mentioned earlier with like workplaces and getting late, you can get mad at someone for that, or you can recognize that that's their brain and that it's not going to change, so we can support it.
and that's kind of where we've been working on like leaning into that. Let's support it, let's identify what your needs are kind of deal. Now the other component that we kind of struggle with is the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right? And so that's been very challenging because I simply don't understand.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
even though I understand it as a condition and I understand the symptoms of it, understanding and living, as
Two
you
different
know,
things.
completely.
Yeah. Whereas it dictates so much of when you talked before about that, like that monitoring and that worrying and that thinking about, that's all
Yeah,
fueling that. And for those who are watching who don't know what RSD is, it's a component that lots of neurodivergent folks have where we're still learning about it, but
yeah,
where we're very attuned to any hint of rejection, and it is very overwhelming. It can cause shutdown, meltdown really, really quickly. I think largely, not to, absolutely not pathologizing it, I think it's because to be neurodivergent is to be rejected over
yeah.
and over and over again. But it means we're also attuned to it in unhealthy ways. Like the amount of time I spend being aware of energy and tone and how loud someone's doing something is not is not healthy for me.
Hmm.
And it's an immediate like visceral thing. And it's why to your point earlier with some of the like emotion meltdowns or shutdowns or those kind of things, it can't just be I understand it up here. There's a physiological response that we have to regulate because my body is reacting the same way as my ancestors did when there's a bear in the woods. Like
Yeah.
it is adrenaline, cortisol, I'm flooded, all of it. And I can't just
Mhm.
tell myself, oh, you're fine, because my body's not fine.
And that's a big part of it is what I find a lot with my clients, and I'm sure that you find with others, is that there's a lot of comorbidities within ADHD that oftentimes practitioners try to treat without treating the ADHD component. So, for the longest time, Jackson thought he had kind of a low-grade depression. Well, no, it was genuine exhaustion. And it was that executive functioning paralysis, right? That he had to kind of go through a moment of reckoning to be able to understand, like, no, this is ADHD. And when he started to treat ADHD, all of a sudden these comorbidities kind of disappeared, right? Because
Hmm.
people need to genuinely recognize that ADHD is not just in a bubble, right? Like it impacts so many areas of your life,
Well,
every
and
area of your
so
life.
absolutely every area. And so many people, like so many girls, have been diagnosed whatever anxiety and depression. No, it's ADHD. And we then
Borderline personality
pathologize
disorder, Brianna. Like
narcissism,
I
narcissism and autism, huge misdiagnosis there. And so
huge.
we actually go all this time not getting help for what we need to. And I argue it's perfectly natural to experience depression and anxiety in a world that is not built for you, right? To be
100%.
criticized for not doing enough, for being lazy, for not listening, for not remembering. And you can't fucking help it. You're sitting here like spinning your wheels and trying your best, and the world is telling you that it's not good enough. Also, people still question if it's real. The amount of people who don't believe I have ADHD because I'm smart and have
Yeah, a
successful, because
career.
God forbid, you can't be both.
No, you're a business owner. You don't have ADHD.
No. When really I can't fathom doing what I do without ADHD. I really couldn't. I
And
really
that
couldn't.
is something that you and I had talked about before. And I remember like years ago when you were coming to kind of terms with your ADHD, it really was that like if if people could understand that you are the least lazy person, like your brain is running at 150 miles per hour every minute of every day, it might not be the most adaptive, right? And that's the difference is that you ADHD, it's difficult to direct your energy in a way that makes sense, but you are just a ball of it, a
Oh,
ball
and
of energy.
when it can, like that flow or that hyper focus, when
Mhm.
it can, it can. Like lots of us
Yeah.
say, I joke about it all the time. If I'm behind in like paperwork, I will go to a cafe and literally do 2 weeks worth in 2 hours tops.
Oh, yeah.
Tops. But if I have to like force myself to do it here where I don't want to, it's not gonna happen. It's just
I
not. I'm
gotta
gonna
ask you a
start
question now.
making like a Camp Rock playlist or something completely unrelated because I think that will help me
Yeah.
focus and it doesn't.
No, but I have to ask because I
Hmm.
experienced this with my partner, and well, do I know? I've read that multitasking simply does not exist, right? Multitasking is not a thing. Now, for me, I agree. Multitasking is not a thing. For my neurotypical community, 100%. But I've seen it, Brianna,
Hmm.
because Jackson will be sitting there. He's got his headphones on, he's got the TV on, he's got a book in his hand. I'm not even exaggerating it. It's like he's got a book in
Oh
his
yeah.
hand, he's got his iPad there, and he knows what's happening on each thing. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. But I've tested it. So he does. And this is like, I can't comprehend it. If I have two things happening, I'm like, I don't know.
Oh,
Tell me.
100%. 100%. Also, what do we define as multitasking? I've been doing this the whole time and holding down a conversation.
Yeah, see, I'm not
I
moving.
have a screen there. I know roughly what's going on in it when it pops up.
Yeah.
I know that Alex got home a little while ago and I can hear where he's moving around in the house.
See, that's crazy. Like,
I read 5 books at a time, not physically at the same time, but I usually have a
no,
couple on the go at the same time,
yeah,
different formats. But yeah, a
yeah,
lot of the time I'll be doing something with my hands. Like if I'm watching TV, I have to do something with my hands.
yeah.
100%. If I'm reading, there has to be music. If I'm, and it's funny, like you said, on how much easier sometimes it is when neurotypes kind of are interacting in the same space. I recently went to, was it Ottawa? Yeah, when I went to Ottawa, it was a very neurospicy car, and we listened to a podcast and talked
Yeah, no,
most of the
could
way
not be
there,
me.
like at the same time. And we would like topic switch depending on what the podcast was saying to like talk about it. But we
Not a
paused it, I
chance.
think, twice.
And yeah, he can do that too. And I'm like, okay, well, now we have to go back because I don't know what was said. I don't know what's going on, and I think that that's really, and it's not strictly indicative of ADHD for people that are listening. Like, I'm not saying that, like, every neurotypical person can't do it, but I think it's more common than not that a neurotypical person is not able to do those
Oh
those
yeah.
things.
And but vice versa. Me playing Animal Crossing and watching a TV show and doing both at the same time, and then to hear all the experts say it's not possible to multitask, it's just that invalidating layer automatically, right? Then
Exactly.
you're in school and people are telling you to focus. Then you're at work and people are questioning, having headphones on or watching something while you're doing something because then you can't be focusing.
And that's what I've been a pretty big advocate for in with my clients is especially with kids in school, let them fidget. Get them a fidget toy. Let them listen to music.
Let them stim. Oh my
Let them
gosh, the
stim.
biggest bane of my
Leave them alone
existence.
with their stim.
Leave them be. I guarantee they will learn and
Yeah.
listen way better. And that is the same at home. I see
Hmm.
lots of it, and I've been guilty of it, where there is sort of that, let you're not paying attention, or we have to be doing the same thing at the same time in the same way. I'm totally guilty of that too. But that's another
Hmm.
great example, right? Because what I think paying attention and quality time means might not be what that other person thinks
Yeah.
and means. So then we both have to navigate that. But then that's inner work too, right? I have to know that, okay, I believe this and I think this. That doesn't mean it's fact. We have to get real loose with what's a fact and what's not a fact.
I like that because we do. We do have to get real loose with that because, and ultimately, you know, facts look very different between Jackson and I.
Hmm.
Like, because we work completely differently. And thank gosh, and I'm sure you found this with Alex because you guys are still married, but like we've grown together with it and
Oh,
we've
yeah.
learned ways that it works to communicate with each other. And it's been hugely beneficial for me because I've learned so much from him as well in terms of the fact that not everybody thinks the way I do either, right? And as much as it has been for him to realize that not everybody has an ADHD brain, it's been equally as important for me to recognize that not everybody has a neurotypical brain, right?
Well, and I don't think I would have pieced it together otherwise. Like, know, I know, we all joke about it now. My ADHD tree is a branch straight up. My mom and my granddad, her dad,
Yeah.
all very much do. My granny doesn't. And so she's been the kind of outlier voice. But growing up, yeah, that's just how your brain works. That's how you
Yes.
communicate. So it was totally missed until you're in different spaces. And then it was like, what do you mean you don't have a running internal monologue that talks 24/7
Incessantly. And it's
incessantly?
really harsh. You guys are
Oh
real,
yeah.
the inner critic component. And some of the things like, that when I'm working with my individuals with ADHD, it's truly amazing how cruel that inner voice can be.
Oh, we
And I
creative.
genuinely think, oh, and extremely creative, right? And
Hmm.
like, and that's something that I do work with them on is like redirecting that creativity into something that is more adaptive for them. Keeping in mind, adaptive looks different for everybody, right?
Well, and exactly. And I think, where's I going with that? See, train of thought, it's gone, and that's totally fine. But
Left the station.
it's completely left the station. But that's where the expectations really come in. And
Hmm.
you'd mentioned it before, communication is so big because I think a lot of it is rooted in our own assumptions. And there's definitely internalized ableism that happens for each of us. Like there's certain expectations I hold myself to, or certain times that I feel like a burden or annoying or
Yeah.
whatever that he's never made me feel. But then I'll like place it on him. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I have to do that work too. It's not up to him to reassure me all the time. And vice versa. Certain things that are like fundamentally essential to me. And I'd be curious if you and Jackson have this, where there's certain things that if they're overstimulating or if they're a sensory issue that are just like, oh my God, I'm so focused on this. And it doesn't occur to you at all. If I attribute that as, you don't care about this or you don't care that it's important to me, no, don't care about it because it's not a thing to him. That doesn't mean he doesn't care about me. It
Yeah.
means he doesn't care about it because it's not registering.
Right. And yes, we've experienced a lot of that because, we just weren't communicating in a way as plainly as we should have been around spoons, for example. Like, we'd be at, it's even as simple as like, I always use this Costco example of,
Love Costco.
I, I love Costco too, but I'd be packing our day, filled with things, and all of a sudden the expectation would quickly change. And I would be like, oh, do you mind if we just stop by here?
Oh,
That's
mm-mm,
not gonna work, right?
mm-mm.
And then we would argue, or we would get into like a bickering match, or he would fall silent after the fact. And it took too long for us to be able to recognize and just use plain language for me to say, like, I understand that this is a change in expectation, or I understand that this might not be, you might not have the spoons for this. And that's where it became more important of that recognition of like, are you exhausted? But he'll ask me the same thing now, like, do you have the spoons to kind of do this kind of thing,
Oh,
right?
I like that. Yeah, mine is stopping for errands. Or yeah, like I have to because I think one of the things that I think what I would want neurotypical partners to know is I was actually making content about this the other day, is that there's so much behind the scenes that doesn't get
Yeah.
seen. Like
Yeah.
if I pulled up my calendar right now, I have to like I use adaptive time blocking, and so my brain is already like allotted everything.
Yeah.
So I have to cope through, impulse surfing, and so I'm not, you know, going downstairs and like playing Assassin's Creed or something. Like it's a lot of work, and I'm constantly like, okay, my break is at this time, and I can just keep working towards it, and this is what I'm doing. And so if someone throws something in, like in ours for a long time, it was like, oh, can you stop on your way home and get X? I'm so grateful because Alex can do that anytime. He's so good with it.
Yeah.
I can't. Like
Yeah.
it throws like I have to do a lot of regulating to do it. And it doesn't make sense. Like arbitrarily. It doesn't make sense
Right.
because to one of us it's a big deal, to one of us it's not a big deal. Doesn't mean one of us is more or less committed to the relationship.
No.
But I think lots of times, like I'm thinking of my couples work, it's those little moments that build up where people then kind of think that, right? Because it just doesn't make sense to the
And
other person.
resentment starts to build. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's where where I was talking about how I adapt because I can. So if those things need to kind of happen, or, those little, can you stop and do this? Well, yeah, I can, and just accepting that he's not always going to have the energy for that in particular, or like, or to do a radical change in plans, and what I've had to accept as well is that those little shifts and what you're talking about, like having those in time blocks and everything, it can affect, like, if I switch something up, it changes, it ripples right through everything. And so it's really important for couples in our position to be able to communicate effectively of what that kind of looks like for the other person.
Yeah, I think it also like there's certain, I think, old rules about like communication and relationships that you have to relearn. Like I grew up being taught don't go to bed
Yeah.
angry. And I really believed that. And I had to learn that like that is not always the case. Like there are times where parties need to like cool off, emotionally regulate, get some sleep, come at it again.
Yep.
And
And it
like even
doesn't mean there's
separating.
something fundamentally wrong with your relationship, right? It does not
Exactly.
mean, yeah,
And
it
RSD,
means
a
you're
big
bad.
part of that is regulating through
Yeah.
that RSD is going to tell me that this is it, right? You're mad at me,
Yeah.
this is it. We are game over. The amount of times I've asked, are we okay? In
Yeah.
a happy, healthy marriage, because I still do, is
Yep.
like, it's very much a real thing. But one of the things that I've had to do is also really separate and be intentional with language about like, the I statements and the trying to articulate this is what I experienced. That's been really helpful, is being like, I heard or I experienced. Like,
Yeah.
this is how I experienced that. Which just like, oh my God, when you communicate that way, it actually shows how much is just like under the surface of like assumption.
So much is assumed.
In the same situation, you're both in the
And we
same
have to
room,
be
in the
so
same
careful. Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. 100%. But, it goes back to those assumptions. And, he'll straight up ask me now. And I'm so grateful for that, that we're in that space of like, what are you thinking? How do you feel? And he's not making those assumptions. I'm not making those assumptions for him anymore either. Right. And it is shocking how often we're wrong.
100%. It's even like the little things. Like it also involves trust on both sides because you experience the world differently. So like the
Yes.
example that comes to mind is like I start lots of conversations apparently in the middle because my brain's going, I think it's coming out of my mouth, it's not. And so I'll have
Right.
something all figured out and I'll just kind of jump in and I
Yeah.
think I'm being really clear. And in my mind, I have said this out loud, the whole thing,
Yeah.
but I haven't. So
Here
sometimes
I
there's
was
a
thinking that was
trust.
uniquely Jackson. And
N-
here I
Nope.
no,
So
it's a thing.
so I have to sometimes trust when Alex be like, "Can you start over? That was in the middle." My gut reaction, the defensiveness is like, "No, it wasn't. You weren't listening."
Right.
But I also have to trust and recognize that that's sometimes going to be the case for sure. But I also sometimes have to just decide that my brain does that. So I'm going to choose to trust my partner that I care about. Does not give me a reason to distrust him
Yeah.
on this thing because memory also is a huge thing. And I think a lot
Hugely
of us are
impacted.
judged for the memory, right? If you don't
Yeah.
remember, you don't care about it. No, I don't remember. I just don't remember. You try keeping track of everything going on in here.
And that's what I've tried to explain to him, him being Jackson. Like when we look at it, just even in the most simple way, your browser has 1,000 tabs open. Mine has three, right? And so if you ask me to recall something, I'm looking at three tabs. He's looking at 1,000.
There's
And
like a
so,
video playing on one and music playing on another,
yeah,
and there's like videos and
but then I have a lot more empathy for him because when I'm asking him to recall something or I'm asking him to do something, I recognize now he has to go through those tabs. And that's exhausting. Like there's so much layered exhaustion that a neurotypical person just does not recognize.
hmm yeah. Yeah, and then you could make assumptions about, maybe he wasn't paying attention, maybe he doesn't care, but it's not helpful and it's not accurate. The truth is you're gonna have to repeat stuff. There are certain things, I like what you said about the I adjust because I can.
Hmm.
There's certain things that in a relationship, like I'm a big believer in playing to strengths. And we've been talking about a lot of challenges, but there's so many strengths too.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to kind of play to them. Like Alex controls the time.
Yeah.
He makes sure we get where we need to be when we need to be there. Because I will not be that person. But there's lots of creativity, socializing, crisis situation things that like is my time to shine.
The creativity component is something I heavily rely on Jackson for. And he also, honestly, like, he's just more even keeled. Like, it's one of his strengths. Even though inward, his mind is going 100 miles an hour, outwardly, he's a calm, rational human, right? And so he
Cannot relate.
cannot relate.
Cannot relate. I
So,
am not the one in this situation. But there's times when both are probably helpful, right? There's
oh
times
yeah,
where, I rely on Alex's steadiness, and then there's other times where my spontaneity makes us, go outside of our comfort zones and go skydiving on our honeymoon on a whim because we couldn't go on a honeymoon.
yeah, right. So absolutely, like, and I think everybody with ADHD and everybody that has any kind of neuroatypical brain rather, they all have different strengths, and like you can't really say like that they're all going to be the same, or you're even drawing differences between you and Jackson right now. Like, you guys are just as different as every other human, and so I have a very hard time saying like, okay, this is because of your ADHD, right? And
Yeah.
that must be really hard for the community as well.
That's where the labels lightly comes in because 100%, like me not getting recognized early because I was good at school.
Yeah.
I also wasn't at university good at school. I was consistently told I wasn't trying hard enough in math. No, I'm pretty sure I have dyscalculia,
Yeah.
right? So it can be completely different, but I can sit still when I need to. Although a lot less now because I lean into like fidget and stimming and whatever. But I can do the things I need to do typically, right? I've never missed something crucial.
Yeah.
However, there's lots I still struggle with, but equally some of the things, and this is where I love kind of the niche that I've made in working primarily with neurodivergent and chronically ill folks, a lot of which overlaps, of course,
Hmm.
is my impulsivity can be one of my biggest strengths as a business owner, I think.
Hmm.
It's just about how I lean into it,
Yeah, how we
kind of thing.
direct that energy, right?
Yeah, like being spontaneous and being flexible. It means that, you know, there's times where my it's really hard to focus and I have to stay organized and I have to be really, really intentional. But it also means I've chosen a business where I work for myself, I work from home. If I get the urge to deep clean my house at 2 in the afternoon and I don't have a session, then I can do that. And then at night while I'm watching Netflix, I can do my notes.
Yeah.
So,
It's
like, yes,
accepting
it's
as
not a,
well.
no,
Go
go ahead.
ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say it's technically a symptom, but I can still
Yeah.
use it in a good way. Like, that's still being impulsive, but it's not. I worry about how much we police the symptoms because, again, people
Yeah.
want neurodivergent folks to be neurotypical, and we're not, and we're never going to be. And
Mm-mm.
90% of the things we struggle with, some of it we have to cope with, but some of it we can also just do and be.
100%. And I appreciate you saying that because so many things that his instincts look different, right? So like even when we have like set meal times or things like that, his impulse is to eat way later at night. We don't like if we were to act on our impulses, like he doesn't even start to get hungry till 3 o'clock in the day, for example, because he's so the ADHD, the anxiousness, the kind of hyperfixations and all of that starts in the morning time, and he's so focused, right? That the rest of like meeting those Maslow hierarchy of needs is not the priority, right? Like that's bottom of the barrel. And so when he starts to do that, it's not the same timeline as a neurotypical person. And so I've encouraged him to kind of lean in to the timelines that make sense to him, and it's easier. It just makes a way better day for him because he's that anxiety of trying to fit it into a neurotypical timeline doesn't exist. Like it's been life changing, for example, having slow starts in the morning, recognizing that he
Mhm.
needs incredibly slow starts in the morning and he can't just pop up like a daisy and hit the ground running. And if he does, that's setting him up to fail.
Well, exactly. You can either, and this is true in any relationship also, like I think every single thing we've said can be regardless of neurotype and relationship
Oh yeah.
style. You can either fight against your brain and body or against your partner's brain and body, and it's going to be really fucking hard.
Hmm.
Or you can just figure out how to work with it as best you can and how to each make up the differences.
Yeah, you lean into it. And when we started to kind of lean into his way of doing things and my way of doing things, I realized how, like, yes, it's challenging, but looking at it from a strength-based perspective, the way his hyper-connected thinking works, he's thought A through Z before I'm at B, right? And it's incredible because that problem solving, the ability to kind of go through all sorts of different scenarios all at once could not be me.
Yeah. And like he brings it down for me, like brings me down like a healthy way. Because I exactly that. But downsides of creativity sometimes. It's great when it's great, but
Yeah.
it means you can do a lot of catastrophizing and a lot of what ifs. And a lot of the masking and worrying about other people and not just what about A through Z logistically, but then what are people going to think of A through Z? And because he doesn't think that way, he'll be like, one, that's probably not going to happen. And two, then we'll deal with it. And that
That's
possibility doesn't
the
even occur to
hardest
me. I'm
thing.
like, we're
Yeah.
not going to deal with it. Like, there's a pit. There's nothing after that. It's just a pit, and that's what's going to
Yeah.
happen. And then it's like, oh,
That's
yeah, no,
exactly right.
you're right.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. The roadblocks that we hit are the same in that regard. Because for me, I'm just like, okay, well, then we deal with it, we cope with it as it kind of comes up. And why are we even worrying what about what people are going to think? But that just does
hmm
not compute to him,
That
right?
comes up all the time. It's like, why are you worried about this? Why are you not worried about this?
That is exactly the questions that we have. Is like, well, how are you not thinking about that?
Yeah. I think, too, I'm keeping an eye on the time because I know that we have to wrap up soon. I think we just bring a lot of humor into it in a way that's really helped with
Yeah.
us. Like, there was this TikTok a while back where this guy was like, the way your mind works is fascinating. And she was like, ADHD. And it's become like a little catch-all for if it's a thing that I need to explain that doesn't make sense, but it's one of those quirks, if you will.
Yeah.
I do not mean the word quirk offensively. I use it not offensively to myself. To me, it's just one of those idiosyncrasies. So I'm throwing it out there because some people don't like the word quirk. Um, if it's one of my little ADHD quirks, I'll be like, ADHD.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I need to be reminded, like, until you mentioned Jackson's eating, I mentally, part of my brain went down a rabbit hole of like, did I eat? Yes, I think I ate today, but I should eat when this is done. Probably, I think it's been a few hours.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Is it just doesn't I think that's honestly the biggest difference that we have is that, and it's just the simple way of saying Maslow's hierarchy of needs just does not exist in your brain. Like it's
Nope.
very much like,
I forget I have to go to the bathroom
oh yeah,
consistently. We got to where we were going the other day. It's a thing with me. As soon as I'm out of a car or near a destination, I have to pee, but then I'll forget.
yeah,
And literally every time you're like, don't you have to pee? And I'm like, oh my God, right.
I really have to pee. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I do. I'm actually desperate. Thank you for reminding me. But I will be like
Yeah.
locked into something or I'll get distracted. And, it's not because we don't care about it. It's not because it's not important. Food is inherently important. Most people, it's an automatic, intrinsic thing.
Yeah.
We don't have that. Again, I've never missed something, excuse me, crucial, but I've come close. Like filling it, like submitting wedding paperwork on time was a close thing.
Yeah.
But realistically, should I have asked for help on that because that's not my area? 100%. And I think I did in the end. But it's not
Yeah.
because I don't care about it. That was super critical to me. It was because my brain, my brain doesn't care that it's important. I care. My brain is not wired for it to be important in that way.
I think that makes sense to me hearing it from you and kind of looking at how Jackson kind of moves through things as well.
I feel like for something that was completely unstructured, we could just keep talking,
Well, I was going to say that, unfortunately, I have to jump into a session, but during our next kind of time like this, one thing
which
that
we should
you've,
do again. We should
yes,
just keep doing. We didn't even
absolutely.
answer questions, so we'll have to do one just for questions.
100%, because one thing that I was going to say that we really didn't touch on was around conflict resolution and what that kind of looks like. So I did get a couple of questions on that. So maybe during our next time together, we can really kind of talk about the difference in conflict resolution, because we did touch a little bit on the RSD, the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I think it'd be very helpful to talk more about that and the different ways that we resolve conflict and how that can look, not just in the, the neurospicy relationship, but also in relationships in general, of how
In
that can look.
general,
Because you also do a lot of relationship therapy. And, I did get a lot of questions around sex, actually. And you
it
are a
comes up
sex
a lot.
therapist. So I would love to kind of pick your brain for different things, because some of these questions I was like, I did not think of that actually.
Well, and I think we could even do like an entire one on conflict because you're right. I think it's all that spectrum. The same conflicts that come up
Yeah,
in two neurotypical folks comes up in neurospicy relationships, often to a different spectrum. And sometimes, like some of the questions I got or that come up in my work are around competing needs, right? What happens when your sensory needs
yeah,
compete? What happens when your access needs compete? So, or conflict. I'll say
100%.
conflict because it does involve some careful planning for sure and some
Yeah.
intentionality. So I think we could definitely talk about that. Sex absolutely is something I would love to talk about because neurodivergent folks like sex, can have trouble with sex, but they're always left out. Like disabled
Always.
folks, always left out.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions on that, because not only are you neurodivergent, but you also live with chronic illness, right? So it would be really great to pick your brain on that.
Let's do it again then.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Thanks. This was fun.
This was fun.